Half a day. My name is David Fleetham. I'm an underwater photographer and Ikelite ambassador, and I'm just going to go over a little bit about the systems that I use underwater. So to start things off, we're going to talk about macro. This is my macro setup for shooting little teeny tiny things. I use Canon R5s, and for macro, I use mostly this lens, which is a 100 millimeter macro lens. I also have a 70 millimeter Sigma lens that I alternate with. The Sigma is the old style mount and requires the Canon adapter for the mirrorless camera bodies. The housing is Ikelite's dry lock housing. I use the 45-degree viewfinder for both macro and wide angle. The camera tray screws onto the bottom of the body. I leave the lens on in the case of the 100 mil, and it slides straight into the housing. Before I do so, I'll pop up this little piece on the side, which allows me to plug in the USB-C cord that I've got a second bulkhead for. So that goes in. USB-C plugs in there. And then the hot shoe slides onto the top of the camera body. And finally, have a quick look at the O-ring. Make sure there's nothing on there that I need to worry about. Check the sealing surface on the back of the housing with two clamps. Slide it on. And then the third clamp on the top. The strobes I use are Ikelite's 230, their latest, most powerful strobe. And it packs a punch. I previously used the 161s. And by far, these are a step up for the beam angle and for the power setting. It amazes me every time how far down I can go on my f-stops with a pair of these. I've also modified my housing somewhat in that I created a bar across the top of it that mounts on Ikelite's ball joints. And it just allows me to add additional ball joints across the top of it. I've got 5 across the top and actually 2 additional ball joints on the bottom. And so the strobes go on the outer balls. For shooting video, when I have a macro setup, I add a GoPro to the mount on the top of the housing so that if I'm shooting little teeny tiny critters and a whale shark swims by, I can at least capture it with something this way. And if it's something that requires video lights, I take those along and also mount those on that bar that's along the top of it. So a pair of video lights on either side. And then with the added weight of the video lights and the bar and 7 ball joints, the whole unit is quite heavy underwater. And it took me a long time to realize that I used to put ankle weights on my ankle because when I was shooting stuff, I would fall forward. And finally, I realized that this is so heavy that I made a buoyancy tube that mounts along the top of that bar in the center of it. And it makes the entire unit almost neutral underwater. I can literally hold it with one finger down below. And as I'm shooting, if I tilt the camera down or tilt the camera up, the buoyancy can move back and forth. I've tried the buoyancy floats or the buoyancy arms to make the whole thing neutral. And with those, at some point, it feels just right in the water, but if you tilt down, you're fighting that buoyancy, or if you tilt up. And this system allows me to tilt the camera either way and still hold it with just one hand really easily underwater and pull the trigger. So this is the setup that I use for wide angle shooting. I have Canon's 8 to 15 millimeter, their fisheye zoom. And for me, this is probably 80% of the wide angle I shoot is with this lens. I also have several wide angle zooms that if I'm shooting dolphins or sharks, things that don't always come right up to the dome, then I'll use one of those wide angle zooms. But this, for diver shots, for reef shots, is my go-to lens. So again, the Canon R5. Ikelite's dry lock housing. And I use that same 45-degree viewfinder that I had on the macro setup. I've tried the straight viewfinder, and this is definitely my preference. I use Ikelite's 230 strobes, the new powerful strobes. Their beam angle has no problem covering the 180 degrees that this fisheye zoom covers. And I also use both macro and wide angle Ikelite's TTL system. Easily 99% of the images that I shoot on TTL. I've shot Ikelite systems since 1976 was the first one that I purchased. And once they figured out the TTL systems on the new autofocus cameras, it was a game changer. It means that if there's a shark 20 feet away, you can pull the trigger and get a perfect exposure. 10 feet away, you can just keep clicking. A foot away, keep clicking, and all of those exposures are just going to be bang on. This one, I also have the USB-C cable that I plug into the side of the R5. That cable allows two things. I can download the images from the camera without taking the camera out of the housing. And I can also plug in an external battery pack like you use to charge a phone. And I have done that several times on dives where I've been out for 2 dives, one after the other. If I shoot heavily on that first dive, I'll plug that battery pack in and charge up the camera in the housing without taking the camera out on a rocking boat. And it's ingenious and a great addition. And I have had the camera battery die on me on the second dive when I have not done that. So it's just automatically in the gear bag now. So the camera slides straight into the back of the housing. There's a zoom gear on here that you just need to line up and then it pops right in. The hot shoe slides on the back. And then just check the O-ring. Make sure it's clear all around. Pop that on the back, and I do up the 2 clips on the side simultaneously. And then the last clip on the top. I've got the big port, Ikelite's big 8-inch dome port on here that allows me to shoot half above and half below images. And there's a shade that comes with that dome. And I found at the surface as I'm dipping the camera in, shooting half above, half below, it causes bubbles on the front of the dome. So I took it off and I actually haven't put it back on. And I use it without the shade for the most part. Strobes go on that same bar that I had for the macro setup. And then in case I'm shooting video, the same video lights that I have on the macro setup, I'll switch over for the wide angle setup. And then I've got a second float that fits on the top, again, to make this entire unit neutral. And last but not least, that GoPro Hero, I think I've got a Hero 10, mounts on the Ikelite ball that is on the top of the housing. And we're almost ready to go. Before I put the camera in the water, I'll undo the vacuum port and pump a vacuum into the housing. And that I'll try to do even the night before. I'll put the whole system together, pump that vacuum, and then in the morning check and make sure that that vacuum is still sealed. So these are the two systems that I travel with, which ends up being 3 50-pound cases when I get to my, my destination. I love the Ikelite gear. It has held up for years and years. If you want to see some more of my work, my website is my name, davidfleetham.com. Pretty easy to find. Thanks for watching.